Genesis 22 verse 1 says, "Now it came to pass after these things." What things? So last week, those things were that God told Abraham to listen to his wife Sarah and send Hagar away with Ishmael. And remember, and he promised, he said he was going to make Ishmael a great nation. And so it seems cold and it seems hard, but, Abraham, at this point of his life, he's starting to be that man of faith, and he loved Ishmael. And he sent Hagar and Ishmael out into the wilderness with water and bread. And we saw there at Beersheba, which means well of the seven oaths. And we saw Hagar praying to God to help. And her son, she laid under a bush to die. And she got far off away from him. And the Lord appeared to her and said, "Hey, I'm going to take care of him, and I'm taking care of you." And then she looked, and there's the well of Beersheba, one of the wells. Some people think there were 7, there may have been 1. They know of 3 now. They've got 3 of them they found. And they were probably in the time of Abraham. So that's pretty cool that even though we think of nowadays with all the conflict in the Middle East, we have a tendency to say, well, that's Isaac and Ishmael duking it out. And it is, but really, at this time, Ishmael was not, he was the child of the flesh, yes. And Isaac was the child of promise, yes. But Ishmael loved the same God that Abraham did. It was not Allah. It was not anything that led up to Allah. It was the God of Abraham. That's it. And so God promises to bless Ishmael. And so Abraham, and we'll see today, it was kind of like a precursor. Like God said, you have 2 sons. Actually, he says today you have 1 son, your only son. But he says to Abraham, take Ishmael, send him away with some bread and water into the wilderness. And Abraham was faithful to believe God that he would take care of Ishmael. And God did. So as we get into chapter 22, now we're going to see what happens with Isaac. All right. So now it came to pass after those things that I just mentioned, that God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountains of which I shall tell you." So this is interesting that there in verse 2, it says, "Take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love." There's a law in expository teaching, the law of first mention, and this is the first time the word love is in the Bible, talking about the love of a father for a son. And the whole picture of everything we're going to cover tonight is Jesus on the cross. It's beautiful. So important, love, first mentioned with Isaac and Abraham. So Abraham, verse 3, rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering. Now, how old's Abraham here? Like 110, 113? He's splitting some wood? I don't know. We bought us a little wood splitter. We bought an electric wood splitter. It's not, most people laugh at it, but man, that thing worked out, didn't it? Anyway, Abraham's 110 splitting wood. Nice. I like it. So he split the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Then, here's another key. On the third day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you." So this is really interesting. So it says up there on verse 4, on the third day. So we know Jesus rose on the third day. So what's that have to do with this? They left for Moriah, and on the third day they arrived. Well, when God told Abraham to take Isaac and offer him as a burnt offering, Abraham, early the next morning, packed up the donkey. And Isaac was dead in Abraham's eyes. Now, Abraham knew that God was going to raise him or something, because God promised. There's promises about Isaac. But Abraham considered him dead at that point. 3 days later, they arrive at Mount Moriah, and they go up on the hill. So there's another little picture of Jesus there. And, yeah. And so in Hebrews 11, verse 17, it says, "By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises," that's Abraham, "offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, 'In Isaac your seed shall be called,' concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead." So he was going to be faithful to do what God said, even though it went against everything we know. You're dead, you're dead. But he believed that God would raise him up because of the promise. "In Isaac your seed shall be called." So that's an act of faith. There's the second time we really see that with someone he loved. He loved Ishmael. Remember when he was arguing with God about Ishmael? No. Oh, that Ishmael would live before you, right? He loved Ishmael, but God said, "No, your son will be from Sarah." That's the son of promise, right? So, and it also says, that's interesting, I don't know, it's a little side note here. It says that he says to those two young men, "The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you." So he promises there that we will come back. So that's a statement of faith. We will come back. And that idea of going yonder to worship, I just want to point this out. We just get this messed up idea of what worship is. We think that, and Prashant knows, we worship. That's what we do. We are worshipers. That's how we drive. That's how we cook. That's how we love. That's how we help. That's when we go to work. We're worshiping. We should be. But we think that worshiping is like playing our guitars and singing and raising our hands and, shouting hallelujah. And that's worship too. But those are like activities we do. Represent manifestations. But driving in traffic is worship if done correctly. Right? Everything's worship. we need to be worship centric. You know, that's hard. I mean, it's hard. Life is hard. It seems sometimes things come up that you just don't know what to do. I remember when my kids were teenagers, it was we would come up against struggles that, what do we do with this unruly 300-pound man who's only 16? What do we do with him? Ah! We worship. Got through it, and he's a good kid. All right. So, also, worship is valuing nothing over God. You don't put anything between your relationship with God. That's worship. Isaiah 43, I have made them for my glory. Romans 15, we covered that 2 Sundays ago. One man, one mind, one mouth, glorifying God. That's worship, glorifying God in what we do. John 4, true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Colossians 3, and whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. So that's worship. So he wasn't lying when he said they were going to worship. He was really going to offer sacrifice of his son, burnt offering. But that was worship because he was being obedient to God. That's worship. All right. So Abraham took the wood that he split. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it. Anybody ever split wood before? That is not an easy task. That's rough, especially if you got like a Harbor Freight splitter. That makes it real hard. You get one of them real good German ones, Makes it a little easier. But anyway, I can't even pronounce the name of that fancy one. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. He laid it on Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand. So that's how long ago this was. It didn't say, he probably made a torch and had a knife in one hand and a torch in the other and started walking up the hill, right? And the two of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, my father. And Abraham, there's the second time he's used this phrase, here I am, my son. Then he said, look, the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So the two of them went together. Now that phrase together, it kind of implies, there's more to it, we know what together means. Yep. But biblically there's an implication of a union, like being in agreement. So it's, a lot of Bible scholars think that Isaac understood what was about to happen, and he was in agreement, and he went along because he had faith as well, right? So Abraham laid the wood for the offering on Isaac. So that's a parallel to Jesus. They laid the cross on his shoulder and went up the mountain to Golgotha. And here's Isaac with his own funeral pyre, right? Carrying his own wood up the mountain in agreement. Like, where's the lamb? Oh. I almost hear him saying in there where he said, hey, Dad, look, the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb? It's kind of like Jesus in Gethsemane, like, is there any other way? You know what I mean? I get the feeling that was the tone of his voice. Like, this is going to be difficult, right? Where's the lamb? Like he suspects something, right? But I like the way the King James Version says it. It's a little clearer. My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. Up there in the New King James, it said, provide for himself. But in the King James, and I looked it up, the word for is not in there. That's added in the New King James. In the King James, and if you look at the Hebrew, it says, provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went, both of them together. So what does that mean? God will provide himself a lamb. Well, that could mean he's going to provide the lamb, but it could be that he's providing himself a lamb. God is the lamb who takes away the sin of the world, Jesus. Right? It's just, this is so many parallels. Yeah. So verse 9, then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham, sorry, I went back about 50 years there. Abraham traveled through time, built an altar there and placed the wood in order, and he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. All right, so I'm going to interrupt the story there. So where are they? It's Moriah. They're on Mount Moriah. So what's Mount Moriah? What is it? Next door. There's a ridge. So if this is the city of Jerusalem, there is, I'm sorry? It's Golgotha, but Golgotha is part of Mount Moriah. There's 3 peaks. It's a ridge that runs, like if this is Jerusalem, there's a ridge that kind of runs through Jerusalem. On one side, on the outside, is the Kidron Valley, and then there's another valley that's kind of inside the city, and I can't pronounce it. And it's not even there anymore. They filled it up over the thousands of years. It's been filled up because of the city. But that ridge that runs through Jerusalem has 3 high points. And one of them is Salem. That's where Melchizedek's city was. Salem. Then you go north, and there is the temple. And that's where David purchased the threshing floor of Aruna. And Solomon built the temple there. Then you go up north a little farther, and the high point of that ridge is Golgotha. And that's where Jesus, that's Calvary. Hill of the skull. Right? So this is interesting. This is the same place that Jesus carried. And not only did they both carry their own wood up for their sacrifice, but they went up the same mountain. That's pretty big. So now this is interesting, this is Jewish tradition, but some Jewish scholars, you know how they've got Rabbi so and so said this and Rabbi so and so said that, and so you get to pick what rabbi you follow. Well, the idea is a lot of Jewish scholars believe, if you ask them, where did God create Adam? They would say, in the Garden of Eden, of course, but where was that? Jerusalem. They would say the dust of the ground. There was no Jerusalem, but that spot, this spot, and they say that from Mount Moriah, that ridge where Salem, they're not claiming Jesus on Golgotha, but where Salem and the temple was built, That dust was the dust of the earth that God used to create Adam and blow life into him. And so if you look at that, if that's true, if that tradition is true, then this first Adam came from the dust of that same mountain, and the second Adam went into the dust. Well, had he gone into the dust, but he died on that same. One Adam was born there, one Adam died there, the flesh, right? That's really interesting. Another thing is, so how old was Isaac? So there's a lot of evangelicals out there that say, well, he was not a kid. He was 30. They're trying to say he was the same age as Jesus. And and I believe that, but whenever I'm going through this to teach it, I looked it up, and that really is not what I can't find that anywhere. If you look at the King James, and then you look at the Hebrew, it says, the word in Hebrew, here it says lad. Well, that word in Hebrew is na'er, right? And that means boy, young man, child, youth. And it is typically talking about a young man from infancy to adolescence. So so that means if he carried his own wood, he was anywhere from 10 to 19 years old, if he was still considered a lad. So he was a young man, and he could have easily overpowered his dad if he was in the teens and ran, Abraham's pretty spry. He split the wood, but I don't think he could keep up with a 12-year-old boy. I just don't think he could. So Isaac was in agreement with this. That's awesome. Isaac was willing to do this. But the angel of the Lord, verse 11, called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, here's the third time, here I am. I just would love God to talk to me like in an audible voice where I say, here I am. Wouldn't that be it? We want to think that would make life easier. But I don't know. No. It don't sound like it was any easier. Abraham took 50 years to build up to this. It wasn't easy. Our flesh is dreadful. And he said, do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son. See, Ishmael's not your son, from me. That's pretty good. So now the ram in the thicket. Okay. Then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. So I'll finish this idea. And Abraham called to the name of the place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. That's where we get that Jehovah Jireh. That's Jehovah Jireh right there. Okay, now, but it's interesting to me that, we've seen, I think twice, I didn't count, but they're talking about the lamb. God will provide himself for a lamb. Father, where's the lamb for the sacrifice? It might have been 3 times they said lamb, lamb, lamb. But what happens, there's a ram. Well, it's substitutionary, but a lamb is young, it's lesser, right? It's lesser. But a ram is strength. And politically, it would be a chief. It's symbolic of a chief. It's also the word, the same word in Hebrew is the word for like a baluster or a beam. Like, anybody ever work construction up over a doorway? There's that, like if you dug through the drywall and you saw the 2x4 frames, above the door there would be a big 2x8 that goes across, and it holds the weight of the house so that your doorway is stable. So it's a strong, it's a pillar like, and it holds the weight of the structure, right? So, and it's interesting that an oak post is the same word for that, right? Ram, it's the same, it's strength. And it's interesting that the lamb was substituted for ram, strength, power, a chief, And what was, you paint the blood of the lamb on what? The lintels of your homes for the angel of death to pass you by. It's the same word. It's really cool. So verse 13, then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram. Oh, sorry, I read that. So, and it says it was caught in a thicket. So here's another picture. There's the ram, chief, strength, power. Its horns are caught in the thicket. And so what's a thicket? Well, that's a dense collection of trees, shrubs, or brambles that may contain thorns. And here the ram's head is stuck in the thorns, Ugh. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Right? Verse 15. Then the angel of the Lord. Now this is capital A, angel of the Lord. So this is what we would call a Christophany. So here's Jesus, Christophany. So there's a theophany. That's God personified. But Christophany is Jesus personified. Before his earthly presence, before his earthly ministry, when Jesus would come down and appear as a man, angel, capital A. There's lots of angels of the Lord in the Bible, but very seldom does it say capital A, angel of the Lord. That's Jesus, okay? Then the angel of the Lord, capital A, capital Lord, called to Abraham a second time out of heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and as of the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. Okay, so this is interesting. Now, wait a minute now. There's something missing here. Let's read that again. Verse 18, in your seed, this is the angel of the Lord talking to Abraham. Now, we've covered this. Every time that God promised Abraham, he said, your seed will be like the dust of the earth. Your seed will be like the sand of the sea. Your seed will be like the stars of the heavens, right? And here he puts them all together. In your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed because you have obeyed my voice, right? Then he says, so Abraham, so the angel of the Lord's done talking now. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose and they went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt in Beersheba. Well, where's Isaac? It doesn't say Isaac came down with him. Huh? It's not implying he did. We know he did. He wasn't killed. Isaac came down. But this is the last time we see the word Isaac mentioned until chapter 24. And if you read ahead, you'll see it, and you'll see when the next time we see Isaac mentioned. And it's Jesus. It's Jesus. When's the next time you see Jesus after the crucifixion? Well, after the ascension. That's the same. The next time you see Isaac is the next time you see Jesus. Huh? No, after Jesus' ascension. After he at the marriage supper of the Lamb. We see Isaac next at the marriage. We don't see yeah. Isaac is out of the picture now until chapter 24. Right? It's amazing. The Holy Spirit purposely omits Isaac out of the next two chapters just for a picture of Jesus, right? It's really cool. So Isaac goes up on the mountain, but it doesn't mention that he comes down. Jesus goes up on the mountain, and he did not physically walk down that mountain, right? The picture of Jesus, right? So verse 20, we'll wrap it up. Hey, look at that. Now it came to pass after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, indeed, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor. Huz, his firstborn, Buz, his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel begot Rebekah. Okay? And that's why let's throw this in there, because we're going to get into the story of Rebekah here. And these 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. His concubine, whose name was Rumah, also bore Teba, Gaham, Thahash, and Maacah. All right. So that's Genesis 22. We're going to get into Genesis 23, and lots more Jesus parallels in this story. And it's really amazing.